you should be skeptical all the time, especially now. Like the internet has changed things so much. Like somebody can just tell you a lie and build a website and start a super PAC or a Twitter account, or, come find you on Telegram. And it looks so convincing. It's important to disbelieve stuff and to be really skeptical. And I'm grateful that there was like glimpses of that on, Canadian children's programming.
Hey, welcome back to the Chesterfield. I'm Ben Rayner.
And I'm iskwē. We're the hosts of the Chesterfield, a place where your favorite Canadian creators talk about their favorite Canadian art. This is a show where we can explore what it really means to tell our stories and celebrate the uniquely Canadian films, music, and other gems that make us who we are.
Although this week we have a bit of a surprise. Usually when we have a Canadian artist in here to talk about a piece of Canadian art that greatly influenced them, they talk about a record or a book or a TV show, like SCTV. That was a good interview with Colin Mockery last week, by the way, iskwē.
Thank you.
Anyway, when we asked Scaachi Koul to pick her favorite piece of Canadian art, she chose the House Hippo.
The North American house hippo is found throughout Canada and the eastern United States. House hippos are very timid creatures and are rarely seen, but they will defend their territory if provoked.
That looked really real, but you knew it couldn't be true, didn't you? That's why it's good to think about what you're watching on TV and ask questions, kind of like you just did. A message from Concerned Children's Advertisers.
Oh my God, I totally remember that. It was so weird. I hadn't thought about that in years, the house hippo.
It's funny, until Scaachi Koul brought it up, I'd completely forgotten what it was. Now, if you know our guest Scaachi Koul, the House Hippo does actually make sense. Scaachi is a young Canadian journalist who grew up in the suburbs of Calgary and now lives in New York writing about media and culture. Her first book is a collection of essays called One Day We'll All Be Dead and None of This Will Matter, which is a great title and got her shortlisted for the Stephen Leacock Memorial Medal for Humor. She's currently a senior writer for BuzzFeed, where she dissects what we watch and read. So Scaachi and I are going to get into a discussion about media literacy in the age of fake news through the story of this Canadian public service announcement from the 1980s.
It sounds awesome. I'm going to be watching. It's interesting that this is the selection, especially in the current climate that we live in. So I'm really looking forward to this interview.
It's a good one.
A reminder before I go that the Chesterfield is produced by Friends of Canadian Broadcasting. Friends is a nonprofit citizens group powered by individual Canadians just like you who care about seeing ourselves and our values reflected on screen. If you like the kinds of conversations you hear on the Chesterfield and want to be a part of the movement, visit the new campaign website, iamcancon.ca, to learn more and get involved.
Thanks, iskwē. It's always a pleasure to virtually see you. And now, let's get Scaachi Koul on the line. Hey, Scaachi Koul, welcome to the Chesterfield. You have the honor actually of being our first guest for the, or at least the first one we tape. I don't know, this might get tinkered with after the fact, but the first guest of our second season, so thank you.
Thanks for having me. You really dangled a carrot and then took it away right at the same time. Unbelievable.
I apologize. That's what I do, though. I'm one of those people. As you know, on the Chesterfield here, we like to talk about a piece of Canadian content that's influenced you or shaped your media worldview. And you picked a really cool one, which I'd kind of forgotten about. The House Hippo. Tell us about the House Hippo. Who or what is the House Hippo?
The House Hippo was a part of this like suite of PSAs that used to air when I was a kid. I used to watch them on YTV a lot. And the ad was this like it was like a parody of like a nature documentary. And it was about the North American house hippo. And it was like this tiny, adorable, like, palm-sized hippo that you could find in your house that like survived off of, I think it was potato chip crumbs and like peanut butter toast. And then they showed like the little hippo feet stepping in the peanut butter. It was so cute. But the argument the ad is making is just because you see something on TV does not make it true. And it's important to be really skeptical about the media that we consume.
It too, because it kind of, it's got a bit of a hinterland who's who vibe to it too, which you're quite clever. How did you first come across it? You must have been pretty young.
Yeah, I mean, they used to air it all the time on YTV, which was all I watched for like 10 years of my life, in Calgary. I think the first time it aired and I watched it, I was like, oh, this is an ad for the House Hippo, something I can purchase because I didn't quite get it.
Your very own
and
House Hippo?
yeah, I was like, so I can have this? And I do remember talking to my parents and being like, do you realize we could own a tiny hippo? It could fit in my pocket. I could take it to school. Like I had all these plans. And then, I turned, I don't know, 6 and like listened to the ad and I was like, oh, wait, this is not real. I can't have it. There's another thing. There's a message in here that I need to pay attention to. And then, I started to think about it in a different way. But obviously, a lot of people thought it was a real thing you could have. Trust me.
Well, I think it's kind of cool that, because a lot of PSAs, right? I remember when I was a kid, it's the same thing. It was like, don't do drugs, don't play next to the tractor or whatever. But I think it's kind of cool that they were trying to educate kids about media literacy. And it obviously had an effect on you because you're, something of a media critic yourself, right?
The House Hippo ad, and then there were a couple of other ones that were sort of in the same vein of just because you see something on TV does not mean that it's true. And your television is not a genius. And the people on TV are not necessarily a genius. And I think that's something that I took into my adulthood. And I feel about lots of things. I mean, the people I read in the newspaper, a lot of them are not geniuses. And just because they say something does not make it fact. And I think that's a really good thing to think about, especially after the last, 4 to 5 years that we've had. That feels like a message I think young people should probably internalize even now. This stuff is important. And when you believe misinformation, it yields violence and trauma and and chaos. Like it's been chaos because people have believed things that are not true.
Well, obviously these PSAs had something of an effect on you. I mean, how did they influence your worldview and what you do now?
Oh, I don't trust anybody. I don't believe anything. You should be skeptical all the time, especially now. Like the internet has changed things so much. Like somebody can just tell you a lie and build a website and start a super PAC or a Twitter account or, come find you on Telegram. And it looks so convincing. I talk to people all the time who believe in certain conspiracy theories and are a part of mass delusions. And they send me these like 25-minute videos that they found. And they're like, this proves it. And I'm like, it proves somebody owns QuickTime. That's what it proves. Like, that's it. So it's important to disbelieve stuff and to be really skeptical. And I'm grateful that there was like glimpses of that on, Canadian children's programming.
You bring me to my next point. Like when you were watching these in Calgary as a kid, at what point did you realize, oh, these are Canadian,
They had one ad, I can't remember what it was called, but it was targeted to girls, like preteen and teenage girls. It was like a message about like, don't let the bombardment of imagery for, young women affect your self-esteem. And I think I recognized, I was like, this is Toronto. Like they had to film this in Toronto because it looked so much like when Much Music would film outside. And I started to like do a little looking around. I was probably a teenager by the time I like started to put it together. And I was like, all of these ads were actually like CanCon. And then I know, I would talk to people online who were American and I would talk about the House Hippo and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like and that's embarrassing when you like go to a party and you're 2 glasses of wine deep and you're like, do you guys remember the House Hippo? And everyone's like, you need to go. You need to get your coat and go.
Well, you, having worked on both sides of the border, do you see a difference in kind of like Canadian and American news values just based on your own experience?
There's a difference for sure. I mean, like Canadian outlets are obsessed with the Canadian angle to the point that it is absurd. Like the Canadian coverage of Kamala Harris was like, I get it. She was in Montreal God bless. We all love Schwartz's. Like it's ludicrous at a certain point, honestly. Like, and that obsession, I think, creates this inferiority complex for a lot of Canadian media people. We don't need to feel inferior. We have enough stuff. We have lots of things to talk about. There's plenty of things wrong with Canada that we can talk about at length. I think what troubles me, I think, about the difference is that in the States, I think there's a little bit more of an acceptance that things are wrong and we can talk about the stuff that's wrong. And in Canada, there's still a reticence to have that discussion. I mean, I still have to argue with people all the time when I do events or when I write something for a Canadian outfit that racism exists in Canada. That is still a conversation I'm having. It is the year of our Lord 2020.
That is a peculiar one. But again, that's our desire to like kind of carve out, I think, our own distinct identity from all these other influences, right? That's just like, no, we're not racist. We're not the States.
Right. And that's always been the case. I mean, the argument has been like the US is a melting pot and Canada's a fruit salad. Everybody gets to kind of maintain their own identity and live amongst each other. That's not true. It just depends on where you look, you know, and arguments about diversity are often discussed in terms of places like, you know, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and those are the places we talk about. We don't talk about a lot of the rest of the country, places like, you know, where the hell I grew up, which was like vastly different from most of like the big cities in Ontario.
Going back to the House Hippo, our shared obsession now, do you think that message is just as valid now? I mean, do you think kids should be getting that message these days? Like, is it even more important now? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I love the internet and it's, you know, I'm there all the time and I feel like I was raised by, you know, the dial-up tone, but God, it has made a lot of stuff harder in my line of work. And so, yeah, I mean, they should bring the House Hippo back. They should make a digital version of the House Hippo ad. That just because a House Hippo tweets something doesn't mean that it's true. And just because the House Hippo has like a really great, like they have a fire Instagram doesn't mean that you have to believe like whatever weird, like racist conspiracy theories that the Hippo wants to tell you about. Like that is really the issue.
I would enjoy a Hippo spreading racist conspiracies.
I know, but I'll be devastated. They're going to ruin the Hippo for me.
You know what? Because I haven't had cable in years, but I forget how cool YTV was too. I mean, YTV was a very, again, especially in the early days. Now I'm a little older than you, but when they'd had like a video, there was some weird regulation where they had to have a puppet on every show or like an animated. But it was cute and very distinctly Canadian because it was kind of low rent. And I say this with affection because kind of low rent, kind of stitching stuff together on the fly.
Yeah.
I mean, you said you watched almost nothing but YTV. What was great about YTV?
Oh my God, it was like gross and weird and everything looked like you could make it yourself, which was fun. Like when you're like 8 and there are like adults on your TV and they're doing crafts with like garbage you have in your house, you're like, amazing, I can actually do this, right? Or like they had like every day a sock puppet was talking to you. So you're like, okay, I can make this. I got a sock. Like there was something sort of sweet about the channel that it kind of felt like it was held together with like spit and tape. But they also had like really well, I mean, it was also very well produced in a lot of cases. It had that charm. I mean, like, God, it was so fun and odd, you know, and it's like kind of a beautiful distillation of what like a Canadian sense of humor is, really, because it's goofy and like delightful and like, and it like made you feel warm and comforting, you know, and that's like some of the best stuff that like comes out of this place.
I love like that kind of 80s, late 70s, early 80s era of CanCon music, like a Chilliwack and Chalk Circle and bands like that. And there was always this, back in the day, people would kind of dismiss it as, that's just CanCon crap. And you're like, it's the same thing as like the Littlest Hobo, the Beachcombers. I don't know why we feel the need to devalue something that actually reflects, you know, what Canada is. It's this weird condition. Like, again, we're desperate for the outside, like, approval, but at the same time, we denigrate our own cultural product. It's like we have a weird cultural condition here.
I don't actually think it's an issue with Canadians. I think there are a lot of institutions that are unwilling to push and promote Canadian projects. with their full backing until it's picked up by the Americans. So, like Schitt's Creek is a perfect model for this. Like, it was a good show season 1, but it took until the end of the show when it was on Netflix. People were binging it in a pandemic. Everybody in the States was like, what is this? It's so funny. I love it. And that's when the CBC like really put their heft behind it. Where was that energy?
It's weird. I mean, do you think, like, if a company like CBC, which, has a duty to reflect Canada to Canadians, won't push its own products hard here or in the States until the States picks it up? What does that mean?
I think I'm like for regulation in theory. I just haven't seen it be implemented that well. In terms of the CBC,
road. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's complicated. No, it's okay. It's complicated. But I also think like the CBC has confusing values, generally speaking. Like, I don't totally understand what their news value is. Like, what do they consider valuable? Because again, a lot of the stuff that comes out of that company, it's not for me. So who is it for? Frankly, sorry, Ben, but you are kind of like their prototypical audience. Like, you are who they're thinking about. If it speaks to you or not, that's a personal thing, but they're really not thinking about people like me, like there's very little, like, there's so, diversity is such a dumb buzzword, but there's very little diversity of thought coming out of the CBC. And so when something hits, everyone's excited. Like, that's why everyone was so excited about Kim's Convenience and Schitt's Creek and Baron von Sketch. It felt new and fun, and it was exciting that it was ours, And I'm happy, when Americans pick it up. I'm okay sharing. They're not my like first thought.
We do have this another weird Canadian condition where we resent all these stereotypes that people have of Canadians, like beer drinking, hockey loving, igloo building.
But then we do it.
And then we perpetuate them. I know.
Yeah.
It's like, and then we hate ourselves again for perpetuating.
Yeah.
Maybe we're just a self-loathing country, Scaachi.
Oh my God, totally are. Like, I don't know why, but every time something like if anything, we do anything or we say anything with our chest, and you got to self-flagellate, in an igloo or whatever, like, again, dumb stereotype we got to pull up. Like, but there's like that old joke that like I think my husband tells this joke because he's in his like dad joke phase, but it's like the US-Canada border is the largest one-way mirror in the world. And so we look down and we see Americans, and they look up and they just see themselves. Like, I don't know. And they do until they don't. I get in like fights with people on like whether behavior has a U in it. And then I'm like, oh, I really don't live here. This is just like a strange land, and all my stuff's here.
You know what? That's a perfect place to wrap. Unless there's anything else you want to add. Thank you so much for doing this. Was a delight to do. I could talk to you for hours.
Oh, that's nice. Thanks.